Hi everyone, you're listening to In-Depth Film, a podcast dedicated to the art of cinema. My name is Greg Bakker.
And I'm Gray Kotze.
You can support this podcast by subscribing to our YouTube channel, sharing this video, or liking it. You can also leave a comment in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you.
Your support really means a lot to us.
So Gray, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. You know, it's been a pretty good week. I've had a couple shoots starting to come back. Obviously, because of the whole pandemic at the moment, it's been very quiet for the last few months, which is why I've been focusing a lot on this YouTube channel. But it's nice to see a few shoots sort of starting to come back. So I've done a couple commercials this week, some banking commercials and whatnot, working as a second AC. So yeah, how about yourself?
Yeah, well, yesterday I finally finished this 1.5 year long project that's been keeping me busy, day in and day out. And it felt so good to finally finalize the last scene and hand it in. It feels like a huge weight is off my back. And now I can focus on my personal projects. I can look forward to working on some exciting new client work, which will hopefully, start filtering in. Obviously right now, I'm just enjoying the break.
A little bit of a break's always good.
Yeah, and just kind of enjoying the freedom and wanting to use this opportunity to build In-Depth Cine on the back of, the success of In-Depth Cine. And of course, create something like this podcast, which is something that I've been, excited to do for a long time, is work on something that you and I can collaborate on.
Yeah, I guess that's what I really like about venturing into this sort of online space, is that we are able to do whatever we want, really.
Yeah.
And it's kind of freeing and liberating to have that sort of control, where you're not only working on other people's projects, but you can work on projects purely that you enjoy and purely for the sake of, working on things you like.
Yeah, it's a very exciting shift in the paradigm. I think for so long we think that we have to work for other people and we have to be involved in all sorts of other projects that are validated by the industry.
Yes.
And it can be quite nerve-wracking when you set off on your own to make something like In-Depth Cine or this podcast, and where there's no immediate validation and it seems kind of random and obscure.
Yeah.
But as we've seen from the success of your YouTube channel, all it takes is focus, dedication, time, and patience. And if you make the right content, if it's good enough, focused enough, I think that you can actually find a surprising amount of success.
Exactly. And having a bit of that balance, as we say, we still have that, like I still rely on the traditional work. And as I say, working on commercials and working on features and that kind of stuff. So just bringing a bit of balance to the life. So should we get into the topic for today?
Yeah, let's get into the topic. So what are we talking about today?
So today we thought we'd give you a bit of a breakdown on a film we shot together in Tokyo, a film called Relics.
Yeah.
Some people have been asking questions about it because I made a YouTube video on this film about how to shoot a no-budget film. So we thought today we'd go through that. We'd talk a little bit about our process of making the film and later get into some of the questions that you guys have for us.
Yeah, I think the subject for this podcast, if I remember correctly, was meant to be how to make a no-budget feature. And so what we're going to do is use our experience of making Relics as a kind of foundation for our ideas and our attitudes towards no-budget filmmaking. Because obviously it's all good and well to theorize about this stuff, but we have actually done it. We've actually gone out there. We've shot a film with no money. Even though it was lacking, the bottom line is we still went out and did it. And we gained some incredible insights from that experience and learned a lot on the way. And yeah, that's what we'd like to talk about.
Cool. So maybe we should start off just giving a basic introduction, telling everyone a little bit about the film. Maybe you'd like to do that.
Well, I think it's important to note that the film is very much wrapped up in our own personal lives. It was a very personal, even at times autobiographical film.
Yes.
Which drew so much from reality. So I think it's important to kind of set up the context here.
Yes.
And frame this film. So the film was shot while we were both teaching English in Tokyo, Japan. You'd spent a year in Thailand.
Spent a year in Thailand in 2014, I believe. And then 2015, as life would have it, we both ended up in Tokyo.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to note as well that when Gray and I were in Tokyo, we were young. We'd only been out of film school for about a year, and so we were really feeling excited about cinema and very hopeful that this experience in Japan would lead to some kind of creative growth and product, some kind of film or project that we could then take home with us to South Africa and show everyone. And in the beginning, we thought that would be a short film. We thought that we'd make some really cool, edgy, Tokyo-based short film. But we soon realized that we actually wanted to do something else.
Yeah, I mean, I even remember we had that initial idea for the short, and we were shooting some tests. We just bought a Zoom sound recorder.
H5 Zoom recorder.
Zoom H5, yeah. So we went out into the streets, actually, and just did a test shooting around the streets of Tokyo.
And I've got to jump in there, man. And what's ironic is that we were actually intending on starting a YouTube channel.
That is ironic. I've forgotten about that. Yeah.
And the name of that channel was going to be Wandering. And the whole idea behind that channel was we would wander around Tokyo, make films wandering around Tokyo.
Yeah. So the gist of it, if I remember correctly, was that you would sort of, as you say, wander around and provide some kind of commentary as we went.
Yeah, almost like an urban tour guide.
Yeah. I kind of imagined it almost like street photography, but with this guide along the way.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the style that we were filming these little tests or YouTube videos in.
And I think that first experiment we did, it was about a half an hour long walk that we did through Asakusa. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So we walked around there for a good 30 minutes and produced this film. And I remember being so taken aback by how successful it was.
Yes. I remember that as well. Because it had also been a while since we'd shot anything. I mean, to give a bit of context, we were also working for companies at the time, the same company actually.
And we were working hard. We were working 6 days a week sometimes.
6 days a week, very long hours. So on an off day, we kind of produced this experiment. And I think we were both invigorated by shooting something again, and invigorated by the potential of creating a film.
And I think that, for a lot of filmmakers, I would say for most filmmakers, the entry point into filmmaking is always visual. That goes without saying. Yeah. So before sound, most filmmakers are trying to buy their first cameras and shoot little music videos and whatnot. And if I think back, it was a really powerful moment where we were walking around with the microphone and I was speaking into it like a tour guide. And when we got back, what we realized was that the quality of the sound for the first time ever, I think what I'm trying to say is, for the first time ever, it seemed like we could achieve really good sound and marry it to a really beautiful image. And, since neither of us are sound recordists and both of us are like a lot more visual, that was a really exciting moment. I think we were like, okay, we could actually have feature film level sound.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It kind of makes sense. It's funny now looking back because the sound of that film was so bad. But no, I understand what you're saying, and I guess it's pretty obvious because they do always teach you those kind of things in film school, the importance of sound, but it really is true. It's sound that really elevates a film to the next level.
Yeah.
And it really is so important. And until you start making films, it's hard to understand the importance of recording sound.
People are actually very forgiving when it comes to bad visuals if the sound is good.
Yeah.
So it's quite an amazing thing.
It is interesting. It is very interesting. So anyway, we'd done this test, and then from there, I remember there was one day where we'd shot this kind of YouTube video test, and then we said, well, what if we do a short? And we went up to the rooftop remember we lived in the same apartment building, so we went up to the rooftop of the building and started shooting some tests. And since we didn't have an actor, Greg took on the role of actor.
Yeah, well, we didn't really have time or the money or resources to, find some guy who would spend all this time with us making this movie. So it seemed like a no-brainer. And also I'd done drama in high school, so I was pretty comfortable to do a bit of performance. And it also made the process a lot easier for us.
It did.
It meant that we could experiment. It meant that we could take a lot of time out of a day to go and shoot something, because obviously it was just me and Gray or one or two other friends who were coming in for a particular scene. And that really was, something that was very much kind of a necessity, I would say.
Yes. And then I think seeing you on screen is part of what made us realize, well, obviously, if we're going to make this feature, we need other characters. And it sort of made us realize that we can use people that we know.
Yeah.
And I guess people call it street casting, whatever. We just call it casting our friends.
Yeah. I also remember shooting a scene in my room.
Yes,
where we
I remember
lived.
that as well.
And I remember we edited it together, and we had this theater in the apartment block where we lived. It was almost like a shared apartment. So we had a shared kitchen and a shared theater. And I remember we went to go watch this edited footage, and we sat back afterwards thinking, this actually looks legit. Like this looks and feels like a film.
Yes.
And all we have to do is basically scale this. That was kind of the conversation. It was almost like starting a business and saying to yourself, cool, so here's one jar of jam and it's delicious. All we have to do is scale this, and then we have a jam business. You know what I mean? It was kind of like that.
Exactly. And then I remember it was in those early tests that we made the decision to shoot in black and white, which was a pretty important decision. And in hindsight, I think the right decision.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, unless you have control over your palette, or unless you're prepared to compromise on your colors, shooting in black and white to me seems like quite an obvious route.
Exactly. And then since there were so few things that we had control over, this was one creative decision we could make to control at least the basic look of the film.
And I think that black and white has an interesting effect on a film. It almost casts a film in a...
it's almost a bit romantic, at least to me.
It's romantic, and in a way that there's something about it. You can almost get away with certain things in black and white that you can't in color.
It's maybe saying to the audience that what we're going for here isn't realism.
Yeah.
I mean, we introducing a palette which literally isn't real.
Yeah.
So, I think that was part of it.
And there's something about black and white that also suggests that it's not really about the visuals, if that makes sense. There's something strange there. Maybe it's a subconscious thing. But when I watch a black and white film, so what I'm cognizant of is that so much information has been eliminated. Obviously, because color is a huge part of filmmaking.
Totally.
And so when you watch a black and white movie, when that's stripped away, for me personally, what it's subconsciously saying to me is focus on the story, focus on the characters, focus on this, focus on the lighting, not really the colors, not really the visual tone of the film.
Exactly.
And
as a cinematographer, I'd say that was quite liberating, at least, is to because then I was focusing on things which were very simple, which was how the film was lit through how we placed characters, basically, and how the characters interacted with natural light, and the framing of the shots. And above that, it really simplified the cinematography.
Yeah.
And I think that helped, especially when we were shooting this thing with no resources, essentially.
Yeah, so a couple of people have emailed me and asked me if we storyboarded the film. Maybe we could just speak a bit to that and how we went about shooting it.
Cool. Well, the easy answer is no. We definitely didn't storyboard the film.
Yeah, we didn't.
We barely had a script. I wouldn't even say we had a script. We had a very strong outline. So we had no scripted dialogue. It was based entirely around improvisation on the character's part.
Yeah. So
while I was filming, we usually had 1 or 2 takes of a scene, if I remember correctly. We wouldn't often have more than that. So we'd sort of have to very quickly get into a space, we'd rehearse, get into a space which was usually a public space, and very quickly in 1 or 2 takes try to put a scene together.
I think it's important here to mention a really important point, and that's that the film that we set out to make was a film that we made with the intention of really making a statement. You know, the film wasn't made to win an Oscar. The film wasn't made to get into a big festival. And that's why I think for people who are, you know, stumbling across this film online and are curious about it, I think it's just important to note that we really weren't too concerned about perfecting this film and about making it nice and glossy and clean. Exactly. We were just so hungry to make a movie. It's as simple as that. We said to ourselves, even if the sound is awful, even if we have to dub things, the point is this: if we don't make this film now like this, we'll never be able to make another feature film in Tokyo ever again. And I think that's true. I think that if we hadn't have made Relics, we may never have had another opportunity like that to be in that place, to explore that kind of territory with those characters in that emotional space we were in at that age. And that's why I think that's one of the positives about the film, is that it does have this energy.
Yes.
That perhaps people are picking up on. And when they watch it, they say, wow, you know, obviously the sound's bad.
And there are many other flaws. I mean, it's obviously not a perfect film. Yeah. If anyone's aware of the flaws in the film, it's us. But as you say, that energy and that tone was really what we were going after.
Yeah, and I also think that we were suffering from a bit of at least I speak for myself here, but I just remember thinking in Tokyo, what on earth are we doing with this camera, this laptop, all these amazing tools, which, you know, a lot of the greats before us would have. I mean, there are filmmakers who are dead now, who, if they were in our position, would have made 5 films while in Tokyo.
I mean, back in the day, if you wanted to shoot, you'd use 16mm, and even that was very expensive, and you need a proper sound recordist, and you need to process the negatives, and then you'd need to hire a place to edit it. You don't just have a laptop to edit it on.
No, it'd be a whole thing.
So we looked at it in those terms as well, that we have all these resources available to us, and a lot of people out there do. So we thought it would be foolish not to use them. Yeah.
I think an interesting question to ask yourself is this: what if I set aside all of my concerns about talent, all my self-consciousness, all this doubt, and what if I just honed in on the intention to make a movie?
Yeah.
And that's what Relics, I think that's why Relics, even though it has so many flaws, even though its narrative is at times very weak, even though its sound is terrible, the point is, what people seem to enjoy, what I would argue people are picking up on when they write to us and say, I watched Relics and I really liked it. I think that what people are picking up on is the transcendent power of that very passionate
like a contagious energy.
Yeah, intention. Yes. So when people watch Relics, they're like, whoa, if I could make a movie. And the truth is, yes, you can make a movie, but it's probably not going to be the movie of your dreams.
Yes.
And that, I think, is my big lesson from Relics, is that, like, yes, you can make a movie. You can actually do it, but you're going to have to make a few compromises, especially if you have few resources.
Exactly. And I think that's something we accepted very early on in the process.
Yeah.
Was the fact that we did have to make compromises. But at the same time, rather than thinking of that in a negative way, you're forced to sort of embrace those compromises and really, have fun with it as well.
Yeah.
Like, it was a fun movie to make. It really was fun.
Yeah.
Cool. Are there any other questions that you got over there?
Yeah, so I got an email from a guy named Jim Reed in Frankfurt, who very kindly emailed us and complimented us, said that he really enjoyed the film. And then he had a few questions here. So he said, first of all, what did you learn from making it? What would you do again or do more of? And what went wrong that didn't end up in the film that you wouldn't do again?
What went wrong?
So let's start with what did you learn from making it?
What are the biggest takeaways? I mean, we've gone through some of them already, I guess.
Yeah, we have gone through quite a few. I suppose I learned the importance of preparation.
Yeah.
I learned the importance of sound. I learned that while on one hand there's a kind of innocence and about the fact that the sound's bad, the brutal truth is that if you want to take your career to the next level and get into festivals, you need better sound.
There's certain benchmarks you have to hit, basically.
That might sound like a very obvious thing, and we were well aware when we made Relics that
we wasn't going to be sold or anything like that.
Yeah. To be honest with you, we were actually it actually got into a festival, which was a great surprise.
That was surprising. Yeah.
It was surprising. But those would be my two things.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate the importance of preparation, and don't underestimate the importance of good sound.
Coming off that, I'd say if you're making this kind of film, which is entirely based off improvisation, then also you need more structure to the improvisation. Yeah. That's one thing I would say as well.
The other thing that I would say is I also learned, and again, this comes with age and it comes with experience, but Gray and I have really developed our understanding of narrative since we made Relics. And one of the problems that we've talked about with regards to the Relics storyline is that there's not enough tension. And so, yes, on one level, it succeeds in being a kind of meditative, contemplative, slow-going film about kind of everyday life. We at the time, I remember we talked a lot about Richard Linklater's work, like Slacker.
Linklater's work, and also some French New Wave films, which really embraced this idea of living life to the fullest, and
I would call it the spectacle of the ordinary.
Yeah, observing ordinary characters and finding interesting things in their behavior.
But ultimately, if you want to make a successful film that goes far, I think you need to come to terms with the fact that, at least this is from my perspective, one needs to come to terms with the fact that tension is essential in a story. And even if you're making a contemplative, meditative, slow burner film, you can still find ways to build in tension. And for example, Gray and I have talked about the importance of dishonesty in a story and how that's actually a vital ingredient to drama. So all you need, for example, let's say you're making a really low-key film, have one character tell a lie or have one character deceive someone. And all of a sudden, you have a bit of drama and a bit of tension that can keep the audience hooked in. And unfortunately, Relics didn't have enough deceit. It didn't have enough betrayal or lies or dishonesty. It was a very clean, very pure, very honest film, which on some level makes it what it is and makes it interesting. But again, it's about that tension. It's about what holds an audience on the edge of their seat, so to speak.
Yeah. And I guess it's important to say, I don't know if we mentioned it, but we did shoot it over a very short period of time. I think it was 7 or 8 days was our total shoot. And we weren't even shooting like long hours or full days a lot of the time. So I don't think, coming back to maybe the negative side or
what would
something
you do again?
Wouldn't do again is I feel like we didn't get enough material as well in the film.
Okay.
I feel like if we were to make this kind of film again, we would need more scenes perhaps that we'd maybe have the option of editing out. Because from what I remember, we pretty much used every scene we shot. And that comes down to perhaps why there are certain weaknesses at certain points in the film. Like it's great to be in a position where you are able to cut out scenes that you have written to shorten a film and make it more engaging overall.
I think that there is a luxury though.
Yeah.
To have
when
enough,
you're shooting over 7 days.
Yeah. To have enough material to cut. And what would I not do again? I think that I would not hold back so much in my performance as well. I felt very restrained and I felt self-conscious. I mean, I'm not a professional actor.
Especially shooting in public. I remember there were times where we planned to have this big scene on the beach. It was almost like would devolve into a fight scene.
Yeah, we kind of imagined that we would, that the ending, that the climax would be me and Rory rolling around in the sand on the beach fighting in kind of a comical way.
Yes.
But the truth is that we were also very self-conscious and kind of nervous about the reaction. Also, Japanese people and Japanese culture is very kind of quiet and respectful. And here we were
two brash foreigners rolling around fighting each other on the beach is pretty...
Two arrogant Westerners, screaming and yelling in the water. But at the same time, I think that there are certain filmmakers and actors who would have loved to have made a scene
and leaned into that.
And they would have leaned into it. And so that would be my advice to aspiring filmmakers and actors who are working together is, don't be afraid to embarrass yourself, because looking back now, that discomfort would have been so fleeting, and in the long run, we would have had this wonderful dramatic scene.
Yeah.
So that's what I would do differently, is I wouldn't hold back on the performance. Okay, so then what do we have next? It seems like, so this is again, next question from Jim Reed. It seems like the film works partially because there's a bunch of charming, interesting people in it. Is that the secret to low budget filmmaking? Put the most interesting people in your movie and have them be themselves?
Cool. Well, as we mentioned, a lot of the casting was our friends and immediate sort of circle of friends that we had in Tokyo.
And one or two colleagues.
And the casting was very deliberate, definitely.
Yeah.
In terms of choosing people we thought would be interesting on screen.
Yeah, we wanted people with some sort of screen presence. We wanted people who had an interesting look or interesting face.
And people who are living an interesting life. As we mentioned, like a lot of it came from drawing on personal experiences. So if people in real life were interesting characters, we found that naturally, I think they brought some of that to the screen.
Yeah, and people have asked as well in other emails we've received, how did you, get people to work with you? How can you convince actors? I think what you have to remember this is that passion and energy are infectious. So if you're passionate about something, if you're energetic about something, if you're gonna go up to someone and tell them about your project and show that passion, show that energy, you'll be amazed at how quickly people respond and how positively people respond, and to that energy, because like I said, it's infectious. So that's what essentially happened with us. If I think about it in retrospect, is that we were so excited, so passionate. We didn't doubt ourselves at all. All we said to people was, look, we're making this movie. Do you want to be in it? We're going to shoot at the zoo. We're going to shoot at the beach.
Yes.
And people were great. They said, yeah, sure, this will be fun.
Exactly. And as you say, the more you talk about it between us and the more we talked about it with our friends, the more you find that people are happy to get involved.
Yeah, people don't mind having fun and, putting themselves on camera if they can see that they're being directed and led by a strong...
There's some kind of vision behind it.
Yeah, there's some kind of... Yeah, that's the word, vision.
Yeah, totally.
How much time do you have left, Gray?
A couple minutes. I think we should start wrapping it up soon.
Okay. So finally, he says, I'm most interested in how you guys approached the storytelling... I'm most interested in how you guys approached it storytelling-wise, since there wasn't a script. What were you thinking while shooting, and how did you pace the film in editing?
Okay. Well, maybe we should talk a bit about the editing process, which was a bit of a collaboration between the two of us. I think you did most of the editing, but we certainly worked on it together. And when we edited, we'd always be in the same room, I think. Yeah,
and we'd come home after a day of shooting. We'd go into the theater, the share room theater, and then we'd project the footage onto a big screen. We'd edit. We'd see what it looks like. We almost like dailies, I guess.
Yeah.
And that was how we put the project together. And I guess the basic storyline in our mind was, a foreigner is going to spend his last day in Tokyo, so he's going to set off on this adventure throughout the day.
Yeah.
And that was really the only kind of that was like the arc, if you could understand it that way. So the arc was start in Tokyo, end at the airport, and in between that, meet up with a bunch of his friends to say goodbye.
Yeah. And it is quite a meandering movie. The whole story takes place over a day, really.
Yeah.
And it is about the meandering experiences he has during that day. So I think the pacing of the film kind of reflected that. A lot of the takes we shot were very long takes. So it certainly wasn't cut in any kind of snappy way. We wanted to let it breathe and be a meandering film that reflected the character's experience on screen.
And in a way, looking back now, I think that the film really does... I think it really does speak to the strangeness of the Tokyo experience.
Relics, as a foreigner living there.
Like Relics really is a great... If I can say so myself, it's a great representation of the meandering type of experience that one has when one's a foreigner living there. You do kind of drift between a zoo and Sky Tower and a restaurant and the aquarium and meeting random people, and eventually it's almost like
people drift in and out of your life because
Yeah.
a lot of the people living there live there for short periods of time. So there is that kind of, I don't know, nostalgic sadness as well to meeting people and then seeing them leave, and which was built into Relics.
I think another point that's really important to make is about the name. So for us, in outlining the film, it wasn't just, okay, we want to tell a story about a guy leaving. We also wanted there to be a bit of a message, and we came up with the name Relics because it spoke to this idea of something in history remaining, and something in your history still being a part of your life in some way, which is essentially what a relic is. Speaks to like a bygone era. And in Japan, for example, there was an apartment that my parents had lived in the 80s, which features in the movie. And that, for instance, was a relic that we used. And then, of course, there's a deeper level to it where, there's a link to our position in South Africa and all that. And I think what I'm really just trying to get at is, if you're interested in making a film, it's great to have a story, but it's
important to find that kind of foundation and the thematic foundation to base that story upon. Otherwise, it tends to meander too much.
Yeah, it does. But that said, Relics is very much about the story. It's not like we had the resources to hammer home our theme.
Of course.
In the film that we're currently writing now, which is called The Sun, we have more experience and we have a better understanding of narrative to push the theme a bit harder. With
and
more
hopefully going to use some of these lessons that we've learned through the process of filming this movie and that we've discussed in this podcast to make a better second film.
I think I'd just like to close by saying that it's really hard to actually talk about this process of making Relics because it was 5 years ago.
Yes.
And so my memory, for instance, is not that great. And I'm really just remembering bits and pieces from that process.
And I'd really like to, I guess, thank everyone who's taken the time to watch it. And we've gotten a lot of emails, and it's been quite surprising because when we made this, it really was an obscure film. But it's nice to see a few people watching it and getting something out of it, because that's ultimately why you make films. Right.
If I go back to one of the core ideas that we were talking about at the time when we were making Relics, this just came back to me now. One of the really interesting ideas that we discussed was, what if people made films like they doodled? What if people made movies like they played on the guitar?
Yes.
In other words, what would happen if we turned feature filmmaking on its head, and instead of trying to be perfect,
super structured and play every note perfectly?
Exactly. In other words, what's the jamming equivalent of feature filmmaking? And I think it's something like Relics. Relics is like it's like a jam session. It's a bit messy, but it's still cool.
Which is kind of the reason, at least partly, if I remember correctly, that the soundtrack was so jazz inspired.
It was improvised and it was
a little bit loose,
interesting, and whimsical as well. We wanted it to be. That's something else. Is if you're going to make a low budget movie, one of the things you can do well is music. It's one of the few areas where you can really affect the tone and quality of your movie. And that's something we did, is we took this strange aesthetic and strange landscape, Tokyo, and juxtaposed it with these Western characters, and then added this jazz music.
This old school, sensibility.
And all together that produced a really unique feel, a unique tone.
Or at least we hope it was a bit unique.
Well, we hope it was unique. I mean, at the time when we screened it, a lot of people said that it was that the music was pretty decent.
Yes, yeah. It's one of my favorite parts.
Anyways, we've got no more time left.
So let's wrap up the pod.
Cool. Well, great. It's been great talking about Relics with you. I really do hope that in our ramblings, we were able to communicate something of
a couple
value.
of points. Let's hope so. And if anyone out there has any topics that you would like us to cover in a future episode, it'd be great if you could comment in the comment section below, and we'd love to have a look at them, and it might provide us with some future content to talk about. Otherwise, coming up, we're probably going to be looking at a few more movies and giving our thoughts and opinions on them. Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for joining In-Depth Film, a podcast dedicated to the art of cinema. My name is Greg Bakker.
And I'm Gray Kotze.
And we'll see you in the next episode.